If one day your commanding officer pointed across the room at a silent woman in the corner and declared coldly, "This person was grounded for a crime no one dares to mention," what would you believe? Picture this. A training hall echoing with tense laughter and the clatter of boots, eyes darting with suspicion. In the corner, Alexis Moran sits alone, her posture perfectly upright, every movement calculated to take up less space. A faint scar traces the inside of her wrist, a story untold. Her uniform is crisp but faded, an old squadron patch fraying at the edges, the colors long washed out by time. No one approaches her. No one meets her gaze. There are some secrets that an entire military base tries to bury. But what happens when the person they all call the ghost, the one they've exiled with whispers and side glances, is suddenly called by name, by the President of the United States, right in the middle of a training session? Have you ever witnessed injustice so sharp it made your heart clench? Have you ever wondered what becomes of those the world leaves behind? If you've seen a moment like that, if you know someone who's been pushed aside, leave a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from, and don't forget to like and subscribe, because sometimes the quietest people carry the loudest truths. And so, this is the story of Alexis Moran, the woman everyone was wrong about. Alexis Moran turned 47 the week her assignment changed for the last time. Once, her name was spoken with respect, sometimes even awe, along the flight lines of squadrons she had called home. In old photographs, her smile was always one notch too subtle for the headlines. Just the hint of a grin behind aviator glasses, helmet tucked under one arm, her call sign, Marauder, stitched proudly across her vest. But now, in the muted, wind-bitten expanse of Stonelake Air Force Base, Colorado, Alexis wore no call sign. Only the standard issue blues, pressed with precision, a faded patch just visible above her heart. The world saw her as a logistics officer, filing orders, organizing shipments, monitoring fuel reserves. They didn't see her at night, alone in the cold glow of the flight simulator bay, running impossible combat scenarios over and over. Her face lit by the sterile blue light, her hands steady, her jaw set. A ritual, a quiet defiance, and a promise. She would never let herself go dull, never let herself forget. 6 years ago, over Aleppo, everything changed for Alexis. One mission, one loss she never spoke of, sent her to ground and left her with a promise only she remembered. Early in her new post, Alexis caught sight of Naomi Patel being cornered near the hangar. Without raising her voice, Alexis stepped between them. "If you want to test someone, pick me," she said quietly. The bullies faded away, and Naomi never forgot it. But pain, like memory, has a way of surfacing, especially here, surrounded by people who only remember the legend as a whisper. Most of them didn't care. Some, like Lieutenant Chris Tilden and Sergeant Diego Rivas, actively resented her presence. "Legacy hires," they'd mutter over lunch trays, or loud enough in the locker room that she would have to hear. Probably got strings pulled. Some people just won't let go. Alexis met their stares with silence. Not submission, not pride, just an unbreakable reserve. In the training rooms, Tilden would lean close and whisper, "You know, Moran, there's a reason the Air Force keeps you on the ground now." He always made sure the others were listening. Diego, brash and quick to laugh, wasn't much subtler. "Don't worry, we'll catch you up on the new tech. Maybe you can teach us how to fly without crashing." But Alexis's nights were her own. After hours, long after the last shifts had turned in, she'd slip into the simulator bay, her security code still active, her presence quietly ignored by tech staff who'd learned not to ask questions. There, Alexis lost herself in precision, recalibrating a misaligned sim for a rookie, leaving anonymous notes on troubleshooting checklists. Her help was quiet, but unmistakable. That promise had a name, Callahan. Her wingman, lost on the last run, whose memory lingered on her watchband, a single scratched letter, C, next to the date she swore to always carry forward. I don't need them to remember me, Alexis would think as she sat in the silent dark. I just can't break my word to the past. For all the coldness from her peers, Alexis was not without quiet admirers. Private Naomi Patel, a soft-spoken tech recruit, found herself cornered by a trio of older trainees near the storage hangar. It was Alexis who stepped between them, voice even, eyes steady. If you have time to haze a rookie, you've got time to review emergency procedures. Or would you rather answer to me, or to Brooks? The others scattered, not quite sure what to make of her intervention. Naomi didn't say thank you out loud, but she did that night, slipping a hand-drawn thank you note into Alexis's locker, a small, clumsy token of gratitude that Alexis kept, folded, in her flight bag. Yet nothing in Alexis's routine could prepare her, or anyone, for what was coming. This year, the simulation assessment was changing. Rumor spread through the base. New difficulty, new instructors, higher stakes. For most, it was a nuisance. For Alexis, it felt like the first cold wind before a storm. This time, she would not stand aside. This time, she would not disappear into the background. Morning at Stonelake Base always began with a harsh metallic blare. The intercom's warning, boots on linoleum, doors slamming against cinder block. But today's tension was something else. Something woven into the air between clipped greetings and the steely looks cast down the main hall. It was simulation day. Everyone talked about it, but no one admitted their nerves. A new assessment protocol called Phantom Gauntlet was rolling out. Rumors said the Air Force borrowed it from a special ops training suite, designed to break even the best. Lieutenant Chris Tilden strutted into the hangar with his usual careless swagger, Diego and the other young officers trailing behind him like a pack. They all wore fresh-pressed flight suits and grins sharpened for show. Alexis entered quietly, unseen by most, but not by everyone. Naomi Patel, clutching her tablet to her chest, offered a small, conspiratorial smile as Alexis passed by. Alexis nodded back, the gesture almost imperceptible. The instructor leading the session was new to Stonelake, a name already passed in wary whispers. Captain Karen Brooks, decorated in the Pacific, known for an attitude as cold as the Rockies themselves. She stood at the head of the simulator bay, jaw set, her eyes taking in the room in a single scan. All right, let's skip the pep talk. This isn't about ego, it's about survival. If you want to treat it like a game, the Phantom Gauntlet will chew you up. Understood? Silence. Brooks listed the order of flight. Tilden, then Diego, then a parade of younger officers, all eager or pretending to be. Alexis was last, as always. It didn't matter that she had more hours in the air than the rest combined. The unspoken assumption was that she'd go last, so no one else would have to follow. Tilden cracked his knuckles, then slipped into the first simulator, the room's eyes tracking him like a live feed. Brooks tapped her pen against the clipboard. Once, twice. Scenario: multiple bogeys, radar jamming, SAMs in the valley, limited fuel. Objective is simple: survive. She let the word hang in the air. Begin. The simulation unfolded on the main screen. Tilden's confidence faded fast as digital threats multiplied. Sam Locke's shrieking, electronic countermeasures overwhelming his systems. He pulled sharp turns, burned fuel, fired blindly. Within 2 minutes, a red warning flashed. Eject. Mission failure. Tilden climbed out, face flushed, blaming lag, software, anything but himself. Brooks didn't even raise an eyebrow. Next. One by one, the others followed. Diego tried to joke his way through the scenario. "I'll show you old school flying." But the sim was merciless. He lasted 90 seconds, missiles closing in from angles he didn't see coming. As each candidate fell, the hangar's bravado thinned. Whispered confidence gave way to silence and the steady, anxious tick of a wall clock. Brooks's face didn't change, but a shadow crept into her eyes. She turned a page on her clipboard, then looked up at Alexis, almost as if she'd forgotten she was there. "Lieutenant Moran, you're up." A hush fell. Tilden, still massaging his bruised ego, leaned toward Diego. "Place your bets. Think she even remembers the controls?" Diego snorted, but his laughter was nervous. Even he had to admit Alexis's presence was different this morning. Alexis stood, straightening her jacket. Her hand trembled, just for a second, as she adjusted the strap on her old watch, the one with the single scratched letter C. She stepped past Naomi, who gave her a look somewhere between worry and admiration. As Alexis climbed into the simulator, her fingertips lingered on the cold metal frame. Not out of superstition, but ritual, a gesture that said, "I am here, and I am ready." Inside the simulator, the world shrank to cockpit switches, HUD lines, the subtle hum of hydraulics. The scenario loaded. Virtual dusk over a jagged mountain range, hostile radar signatures flickering everywhere. In the control room, the silence thickened. Alexis closed her eyes and took a slow breath. "Callahan, you with me?" she whispered, barely audible, just for herself. The routine was always the same. Check instruments, check comms, check fear at the door. She didn't fly the way the others had. She dropped altitude instantly, hugging the canyon walls so closely that digital warning bells rang. She cut the afterburner, reduced her IR signature, turned off every non-essential system, and used the terrain for cover. Brooks's eyes narrowed. This wasn't textbook flying. It was something else. On the screen, a young avionics tech, Private Liu, watched with fascination as Alexis used a pattern he'd only ever seen in archived Black Ops footage. He nudged Naomi, whispering, "Did you see that? That's manual stealth flying. Nobody trains that anymore." Alexis twisted through the canyon, letting enemy fighters overshoot her position, picking her moments with uncanny precision. She didn't rush. She didn't panic. When the first missile lock screamed through the speakers, she calmly deployed countermeasures, then reversed course so suddenly the AI couldn't track her. Enemy icons disappeared, one by one, picked off by gunfire at impossible angles. In the hangar, disbelief began to ripple. Tilden's jaw clenched. Diego stared at the screen, muttering, "No way, that's not possible." The simulation ramped up, throwing new threats into the sky. More bogies appeared. The ground lit up with hostile SAM sites, and the sky itself seemed to narrow, closing in around her. But Alexis never lost her composure. She let her adversaries make the first move, luring them into a false sense of advantage, then outmaneuvered them with a kind of grace that looked almost reckless, until you saw how cleanly it all fit together. Private Liu, still glued to the monitor, whispered, "I think she's writing her own playbook." Naomi nodded, eyes wide. The others, Tilden, Diego, even Captain Brooks, were silent now, caught somewhere between skepticism and awe. And then, disaster. A simulated systems malfunction, one designed to trigger panic. Alexis's targeting display went dark. For a split second, her breathing paused. In the control room, Tilden grinned, waiting for her to fail. But Alexis didn't hesitate. She switched to backup instruments, recalculated her position, and improvised, using the canyon's echo to mask her signal, tricking the simulation's AI into thinking she'd crashed. It bought her 30 seconds, just enough to reset, reassess, and strike. Her hands moved faster now, but every movement was deliberate. She fired only when certain. When the mission called for evasion, she slipped away like a shadow, vanishing between digital peaks. When the only path left was straight through, she took it. Eyes locked on the impossible, refusing to blink. The clock in the control room ticked louder with each passing second. When Alexis finally emerged from the last canyon, only one enemy fighter remained. She pulled her jet into a steep climb, flipped over at the summit, and dropped straight down, right onto her adversary's tail. A short burst from her gun. The final target blinked out. Silence. Mission complete. Survival probability, 100%. The result flashed across the main screen in giant white letters. No one in the room moved. Brooks stared at Alexis's name on the monitor, then at the woman herself, who sat inside the simulator, breathing slow and steady, hands still on the controls. Diego was the first to break the silence. No freaking way! Tilden tried to hide his shock, but the color had drained from his face. Naomi exhaled shakily, a smile breaking through. Private Lou blinked, eyes wide with realization. She didn't just beat the system, he said softly. She broke it. Alexis climbed out of the simulator, rolling her shoulders. She looked at Brooks, then at the silent crowd of trainees, her expression as calm as ever. She didn't ask for applause. She didn't explain. She simply took her place at the end of the row, waiting as if nothing unusual had happened. Captain Brooks cleared her throat. All right, that's the standard for the rest of you. Who's next? Her voice was neutral, but there was a new note in it. Respect, or maybe something bordering on disbelief. But the room knew. Something had shifted. The Phantom Gauntlet was supposed to humble everyone. Instead, Alexis had shown them a kind of mastery no one had expected, something almost mythic. In that moment, her legend was reborn, not as a memory of Aleppo, but as a presence, living and unshakable. As the day faded into the blue dusk of Colorado and the hangar emptied out, Naomi found Alexis quietly reviewing simulation data alone. The young private hesitated, then spoke. Why do you still try so hard, after everything? Alexis looked at her. You don't get to choose what you owe to the past. You only get to choose if you keep carrying it. As she packed away her things, a voice echoed in the emptying hall. Next week's assessment will be even harder. Don't get comfortable. But Alexis just smiled. This time, she was ready. Night at Stonelake always arrived in a hush. The distant hum of jets, a few stubborn stars above the sodium-orange glow of the base perimeter. Inside the ops center, though, the tension was sharp and electric. The next round of Phantom Gauntlet wasn't a drill this time. The assessment had been updated, impossibly harder. Extra targets, random failures, secret no-win scenarios known only to the senior instructors and command. Alexis felt it before she heard it. The shift in the air. The way conversations faded when she entered. The sidelong glances that carried a new, uneasy respect. Not admiration exactly, but the realization that the legend in their midst was not just rumor after all. Word had traveled. There was no more laughter, only low murmurs. Naomi found herself quietly surrounded by new allies. Trainees who'd once ignored her now hung on her descriptions of Alexis's sim run. Even Tilden and Diego had grown quieter, the edges of their bravado dulled by something that felt almost like awe. But tonight, it wasn't a crowd that awaited Alexis. It was command. Colonel Rawlins, square-shouldered, precise, every medal on his chest earned the hard way, stood beside Captain Brooks as the last candidates filed out. He gestured for Alexis to stay. "Moran," he said, tone clipped but not unkind. "I'd like you to repeat your simulation, with a few modifications." The phrase landed with weight. Brooks handed Alexis a revised scenario file, a digital folder with the words, "Classified OB Black," in stark red at the top. Alexis glanced at it, her face unreadable. "Understood, sir." She settled into the cockpit, sensors flickering to life. From the corner of her eye, she saw Rawlins and Brooks conferring in hushed tones with a civilian in a dark suit. Something unspoken moved between them. The sim loaded. Nighttime, hostile airspace, encrypted comms blackout, a dense web of SAMs and enemy fighters. Alexis's HUD flashed warnings she'd never seen. This was no routine test. She was flying blind, hunted, outnumbered, but it wasn't fear that steadied her hands. It was the familiar clarity of danger, a feeling she'd thought she'd lost after Syria. The control room watched, breathless. Even Brooks, stone-faced as ever, leaned closer to the screen. "This is the real scenario," she muttered. "Not even special ops get this one." At first, Alexis did as she always had, hugging the ground, letting the terrain swallow her radar signature, eyes flicking between threat indicators. But this time, the simulation fought back. Countermeasures failed. Enemy jets anticipated her tricks. A digital missile slammed into her wing. For a moment, everything spun, her heart hammered. But Alexis refused to yield. She cut power, letting her jet drop through the virtual darkness, falling, not flying, until the enemy overshot, expecting a dead pilot. She restarted engines mid-plummet, righted the aircraft, and re-engaged. Every move was calculated, desperate, precise. She picked off targets in the blind spots, used static to mimic debris, masked her digital signature behind enemy comms. She adapted with each blow, learning, evolving in real time. In the control room, Rawlins whispered, "She's rewriting the doctrine." Then, just as Alexis was approaching the simulated border, her mission almost complete, a piercing alarm shattered the moment. The lights flickered. The simulation stopped. The ops center doors burst open. A captain in dress blues, face pale, rushed to Rawlins. "Sir, priority communication, White House Situation Room. They're asking for Lieutenant Alexis Moran, direct line, secure channel." The room went silent. Even the civilian's face tightened. Rawlins turned, speechless. Brooks stared. Alexis, still buckled in, met their eyes calmly. She stood, not with bravado but quiet resignation, and walked to the secure console. The handset was heavy, ice-cold in her grip. "This is Moran," she said, her voice steady. A pause. The line crackled. Then, "Lieutenant Moran, this is President Holloway. I'm told you're the only one who can authenticate and disable the Obsidian Shield protocol." For a moment, Alexis closed her eyes. She remembered Aleppo, the broken comms, Callahan's final words. She felt the weight of every silence she'd carried since. "Yes, sir." Authorization code, Calix 197. "I wrote the contingency myself. They won't get through." Tell General Marcus. Marauder keeps her promise. In the control room, jaws dropped. The legend was true. She was the architect of the one safeguard even the Pentagon had called a myth. Alexis nodded. I never left, sir. She hung up. The room was silent, not with shock, but with the weight of finally seeing her. The hush broke. Brooks stepped forward, saluting. Others followed, one by one, in the hush of the midnight base. The youngest trainee to the oldest tech, every hand to their brow. Alexis slipped her watch back onto her wrist, the scratched C glinting faintly in the fluorescent light. For the first time in years, she smiled. In that solemn moment, the weight of years, the silence, the judgment, the private rituals in the cold simulator bay, lifted just a little. The faces around her blurred through a shimmer of exhaustion and pride. Alexis didn't bask in the attention, didn't explain away her scars or the secrets stitched into her silence. She simply nodded once, quietly accepting their respect, and turned to gather her things. The aftermath rippled through the base in ways no one had anticipated. The rumor mill spun wild. Stories multiplied in the mess hall and in the barracks, some true, some fantastic. She's the one who wrote the ghost doctrine. She saved a president. She's still on active recall. For once, Naomi didn't correct anyone. She watched the way Alexis moved through the halls, calm, centered, somehow lighter. Even Tilden and Diego, usually so quick with a joke, found themselves silent in her presence. One afternoon, Diego finally worked up the nerve. Lieutenant, He fumbled for words, but Alexis only shook her head, a faint smile at the corner of her mouth. It's all right, Diego. No one here gets to define who you'll be, except you. It wasn't forgiveness, just truth. Something in Diego's face shifted, the start of humility. Captain Brooks, never effusive, paused at Alexis's locker one evening. You ever think about teaching full-time, Moran? We could use you. Alexis answered with a small laugh, gentle but edged with memory. Maybe someday. Right now, I have a promise to keep. The official commendations would come later. The paperwork, the medals, even the classified debriefs. But none of those would matter as much as the silence that now held a new, tender quality. Not of exile, but of peace. As Alexis stepped out into the midnight air, the base lights gleaming across empty tarmac, she reached for her watch, thumb tracing the old letter C. She remembered the promise. Not to be remembered, but never to forget. And as a black government SUV idled at the gate, ready to take her to a waiting flight east, Alexis looked back once at Stonelake, a place of ghosts, of judgment, of second chances, and knew finally that she'd found her own way home. The world outside the base seemed both familiar and unrecognizable, a blur of city lights and moonlit highways as Alexis was driven, quietly, to a secure airstrip. No parade, no fanfare, just the steady hush of tires on asphalt and the drone of classified radios. The only sound in the back seat was the steady tick of her old watch. She thought of Callahan, not as a ghost, but as a voice beside her in the dark, still daring her to do the right thing, still telling her she was not alone. That promise, whispered in the cockpit over Aleppo's burning sky, felt alive again in her pulse. The work wasn't over. It never would be. At the airfield, a familiar face was waiting, General Marcus, grayer than she remembered, but with the same fierce light in his eyes. Lieutenant Moran, he said, not with rank, but with genuine warmth. Welcome back. She saluted him, then shook his hand, calloused, steady. "You always said you'd call if the world needed saving, sir. I just never thought it'd be twice in one lifetime." He smiled, wry and weary. "You always had a way of making miracles look routine." They exchanged few words after that, both understanding the gravity and the cost. Alexis boarded the waiting jet, slipping quietly into a seat, gaze fixed on the clouds beyond the window. For the first time in years, she let herself feel hope. As the jet lifted into the dark, Alexis pressed her palm to the glass. She saw her own reflection. Older, yes, but resolute. The base, the faces, the burden of her promise all faded behind her, replaced by a single thought. Some debts can never be paid, only honored. Back at Stonelake, the ripple effect of Alexis's departure continued long after the roar of her transport faded into the night. For the first time, the air in the barracks held something new, a hush filled not with gossip, but with respect. Naomi Patel carried herself differently now, no longer shrinking into corners, but taking her place at the flight line, shoulders squared. She remembered Alexis's words, "Don't let anyone decide your worth for you." In training, she caught herself echoing that same calm when others faltered. Even Tilden, ever the cynic, found himself coming to her for advice on a tricky systems problem. Diego, chastened and quieter, offered to help new recruits instead of haze them. It was as if a silent challenge had been left behind. Rise or fade. One senior officer, who'd never quite trusted outsiders, grumbled in the canteen, "I still don't get what makes her so special. She just did her job." Naomi overheard, and for once she didn't shrink away. She just smiled gently and replied, "Maybe you weren't looking when she made everyone better, including you." The room went quiet. That week, Diego volunteered for extra shifts with the newcomers, quietly correcting checklists and never raising his voice. Some nights, he'd stay late just to make sure no one was left behind, an unspoken thank you for the lesson he'd learned. Captain Brooks, reviewing after-action reports late one evening, paused at a handwritten note on her desk. Just 4 words, unsigned. "Some debts never fade." She smiled, her stern face softening for a moment only. And in the officers' lounge, talk turned less to rumor and more to possibility. The old narrative, "the ones left behind are the ones who failed," was quietly, irrevocably broken. Now, even the youngest trainees looked around and wondered, who else here carries a story you'll never know? No official ceremony marked Alexis's absence, but the squadron quietly adopted one of her old rituals. On the anniversary of the Aleppo mission, they left a small token, a flight badge, a patch, a single white carnation, at the base of the memorial wall. Not in her name, but for everyone who ever kept a promise in silence. Out in the world, Alexis's name faded once more from daily conversation. But for those who had watched, who had learned, the legend was real, and it had changed them. Not into heroes, perhaps, but into something truer. Witnesses, bearers of memory, carriers of silent strength. When Alexis stepped out of the secure terminal in D.C., dawn was just breaking. The city gleamed, cold and alive, as if nothing had ever gone wrong, as if every promise might still be kept. She walked quietly down the concourse, past officials who didn't recognize her, past men and women in uniform who would never know the whole story. She didn't need them to know. That night, in her small temporary quarters, Alexis sat alone with the letter she'd always carried, the one from Callahan's family, edges worn from years of folding and unfolding. She read it once more. We never blamed you. We just hoped you'd find your way home. She finally understood. Some burdens are only heavy because we refuse to share them. And sometimes, by living quietly, carrying scars with grace, you set others free to do the same. Outside, the world spun on, unaware that a single, silent woman had saved it twice. But maybe that's how it should be. Maybe the ones who hold the line for everyone else never need to be seen, only to be believed in. The next morning, Alexis sent one message to Stonelake's new class of recruits. You are more than your worst day. Keep your promise, even if no one is watching. At Stonelake, the message landed quietly in the inboxes of every new trainee and seasoned officer. No name, no signature, just words that echoed long after the screens dimmed. From that point forward, the Alexis rule became a quiet legend, passed in hallways and whispered before big tests. Remember, you're more than what others say about you, and nobody really flies alone. The lessons lingered, not just in protocols or procedures, but in how the base treated its invisible members. The quiet ones, the older ones, those with faded patches or stories left unspoken. You could see it in the way Naomi stood her ground, in Diego's newfound humility, in the small kindnesses that didn't make it into the official record. Even Tilden, once the loudest skeptic, became an advocate for anyone who seemed overlooked. And Alexis herself? She never returned for ceremonies, never gave speeches, never sought a headline. Instead, she lived the truth she'd learned in darkness. Sometimes the greatest acts of courage are the ones no one ever sees. Sometimes you don't need the world to remember your name. You just need to keep your promise. So maybe this story is for you. If you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever carried a burden alone, if you've ever wondered whether it was worth it to stay true when no one's watching. Before she left for good, Alexis slipped her old, fraying squadron patch into Naomi's locker, right next to the thank you note from months before. A silent legacy, a promise passed on. Who is the silent hero you'll never forget? Share their story or a simple thank you in the comments. Because sometimes the smallest courage echoes furthest. Have you known an Alexis in your life? Were you ever one yourself? Tell us your story below. And if this story moved you, share it. Because someone out there might need it tonight. Subscribe, leave a like, and let us know where in the world you're watching from. Because sometimes, the quietest strength is the one that saves us all.